Thank you very much. So I'm going to present the last case study, Spreewald, Germany. And here we investigated several governance models, but we only have time for one. So we selected a Citizen Foundation Cultural Landscape Spreewald. And it was initiated to address functional misfit, a governance gap, because there was I'm going to explain later a bit more, but there was a shortage in public governance program to support the protection of certain landscape elements. And it was initiated bottom up. So the Citizen Foundation is the most bottom up you can get. It was founded in 2007. So they last year they celebrated their 10th anniversary. It is fully formalized, so they are registered, they have a mission statement, they have certain governance structures, they have a board that gets elected every 5 years, so they are fully formalized. And in terms of ecosystem services, they in their mission statement, they have a focus on preserving the cultural landscape of the Spreewald region. And this is also related to the cultural identity of the people living there. And this goes together with, because this traditionally managed landscape is also very valuable in terms of habitat and richness in biodiversity. It's also related to supporting ecosystem services. And this focus on nature protection makes the Citizen Foundation rather special, because typically Citizen Foundations focus on social topics. So this having really a focus on conservation issues sets it apart from the majority of other citizen foundations. And also what is special is that the mission statement is very narrow, so they only have this nature focus on nature preservation, while typically citizen foundations have very broad topics, because this is the reason for this is that citizens also have a variety of interests. So typically, citizen foundations have very broad set of objectives, but this has not. So this has only this focus on environmental issues. The funding is through a mix of private and public funding. Of course, they get donations from private individuals, but they also were very successful in attracting public funding through leader projects and other types of projects. So they really apply, they write proposals, and they have an endowment of, I think, roughly 130,000 euros per year, and they were able to attract the same amount with additional for additional project funding. And what is also very important for many of their activities, they draw on voluntary work. So people come and help them with certain activities to maintain landscape elements like mowing or several maintenance activities. In terms of actors, we have civil, private, and public actors involved. Civil actors are the private households, private individuals who give money and who get involved by voluntary work. And also they have members which are local NGOs or local associations. Private parties are some local enterprises and farmers. Several farmers are members, and also several tourism agencies. And public members are the Protection Area Administration of the Biosphere Reserve, the 3 different counties which have areas of the protection areas within their boundaries, and also the cities. Then one of their main projects is to maintain traditionally managed wet meadows, because these are really they are part of the landscape, and they really are appreciated by the local population. And about 1,500 hectares of wet meadows are threatened by abandonment. And there was a public program in place, but they had to, because the state in Germany, Brandenburg, is it's one of the poorer states, and so they didn't have enough money to for the co-financing of European agri-environmental measures. So you get 75% from the EU, but you have to co-finance with 25%. And because this fund was not big enough, they withdraw money from other funding programs to have the money for the co-financing. So there was this governance gap, and what the Citizen Foundation tries to do is to fill partly this gap. So there was not enough public funding. So this is crucial, because the farmers need extra funding, because for them it's not just not economically viable to continue maintaining these wetland meadows, because the livestock numbers are dropping, and they don't need the grass as forage for the animals as they did before, and so it's useless to them. So they don't need it, so they give up the management of these meadows. But these meadows are, as I said before, appreciated by the local population, and they also have a really crucial function within the landscape. And just to give you an impression, here's some photos. This is like how such a wet meadow looks like. This is one meadow that is owned by the Citizen Foundation, so they also spend money to buy them, so they can manage them themselves, but they can only do this for a very tiny part of the meadows. For the others, they work together with the local farmers, and they try to convince them to continue the management. And because the meadows are at certain times during the year, they are very wet, they put this pathway, so they can also show this to tourists and guide them around the area. This is a photo when a meadow is freshly cut, and you cannot do it by big machinery, because you have to imagine that the area, some of the plots, you can only get there by boat, because everything is there are all these little channels, so they have to do it manually, and it's a lot of work, and this also makes the management very expensive for the farmers. And typically the hay was stored in these hay stacks, which also are part of the attraction for tourists when they come to the region. And when you store it this way, it's good for 3 years. So the hay doesn't spoil for 3 years. So you can keep it in storage for that long. And the meadows are also they provide habitat for typical plant species, like this one is called red Reuben, which is very typical, but also very rare species like the white orchid. But I didn't have a photo of that one, so I put this typical one. And also a very important function is that during the winter, the meadows get flooded, completely flooded, because then the water management is changed, so they are completely underwater. And this is really important for the local fish populations, because they use it as a nursery area, for example, for the burbot or the pike at different times of the year. And also these meadows are really part of the cultural heritage. So we did a student class in this region last year, and we made a little survey asking locals and non-locals what really makes the Spreewald region special for them. And besides, like the water that is always present in the region, and the river Spree, and the forests, and the nature, and that it's very green, and that it's that you can find peace and quiet in the landscape. They also mentioned that the meadows are really something that is typical for the landscape, and which they appreciate very much. So what the Citizen Foundation did to raise additional money, which they wanted to use for helping to maintain the wet meadows, was to invent a so-called Spreewald meadow share. This is how it looks, and you can buy it for 50 euros. And these 50 euros help you to maintain 1,000 square meters for 1 year. And it was introduced in the beginning of 2015, and they were able to raise about 8,000 euro per year. And it was like the shareholders, so to speak, include locals, like local businesses and private individuals, as well as non-locals, which is mostly tourists, because area is very popular for tourism. They have almost 5 million visitors per year. So a lot of people come to spend their holiday there. And this was one approach, just to raise additional money for maintaining the meadows. Then a second approach was, because the farmers don't really need the hay any longer, because they don't keep livestock anymore, to think about what can we do if we still maintain the meadows and we have the hay. So what can we do with it, and can we do something with it that really is useful for the farmers? So they came up with one idea about using the hay for heat production on local farms. And this is a pilot where the Citizen Foundation is involved, and the farmer who implemented the pilot, he's also a member in the Citizen Foundation. And they installed an oven which can be fed with whole hay bales, so they don't, which is important, because if you need to produce this pellets, it's extra costs, and it would have been too expensive for the farm. So it was important that you can just take the hay bales as you get them and feed the oven with it, and it's possible with this oven. And right now they use it to heat all their offices on the farm, but potentially they could use, they produce more heat than they really need. So they could heat further 10 households. And they are negotiated with like neighboring households, and they have like ongoing negotiations, if it's possible, to also include them into the heating system. And the investment for the farm, the Citizen Foundation helped them with doing a proposal. So they got external funding, 100,000 euro, and the farm itself, they had to bring up 50,000 euro for implementing this pilot, not counting all the hours they had to spend on figuring out how it really works with the burning process and everything. So these are the two approaches they used to help maintaining the traditional management of the meadows. And now the last slide tries to pull everything back together. So collaborative governance, from this different examples we study, they help to address different types of misfits. So we had like functional misfit, but also with the example Lenny presented to you, it was about the spatial misfit, that you have a landscape that is not really accessible any longer for the people. So it's important to put green and blue infrastructures again, so the people can really experience the landscape. So it's about spatial and addressing spatial misfit. And also an example we didn't present was one of a water management board, and they were also about deciding what water management is needed. So you can combine nature protection within the biosphere reserve, but also farming, because farmers need to access the land, and then they need lower water levels than would be really good for conservation, but they find a compromise, and they try to do it in a spatially and temporarily manner that is okay for all the actors. So all types addressed, all different collaborative governance approaches we studied address some sort of misfit. They were all quite successful in raising additional private funding, especially in the Netherlands and Germany with the zip code lottery, and also they had auctions where farmers had to make bids, and they would only choose the farmers who had the most favorite bids for them. And in Germany, with inventing the Spreewald meadow share. Then they are also quite successful in engaging voluntary workers, like, for example, in Germany, when they sometimes they meet and they just mow one meadow with completely, like with school classes and with private individuals. So just that it gets done if they don't have the money to pay someone to do it who is like a for-profit actor. And as Gregor presented, in Austria, they have this nice collaboration with the school, where the school children help to collect all the apples that they use to produce the apple juice for the schools. Then all of them could inspire innovation, like in the last example, we had this oven for the heat production, and also with this funding instrument, the meadow share, or with the auctions. And some could also increase durability of initiative, especially the example presented in the Netherlands, because they were able to have really this 30-year-long contract, which is a really stark contrast to the agri-environmental scheme you have that only lasts for 5 years. And which is also important in the context of protection areas, because protection areas have, as said before, this focus on, they are designated because they are of national or international interest, but these local initiatives, they really can help to steer back the attention to local demands for ecosystem services. But all of them have also in common that they constitute really small solutions. So it's really a local approach, and it helps to address some issues at local level, but it's nothing you can really upscale to a really high scale. It only works as a small solution. And that's all. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Claudia. We have a question for you, which is why and how did the public actors get involved in a citizen foundation in the German study site?
I guess the best explanation is because they really have this connection to the landscape. I think the people in the different counties and the cities, they really feel that they connect to the landscape. And this was also the reason why they could initiate the Citizen Foundation. So they had enough really interested parties who would contribute to the endowment. And they have this agreement with the counties and also with the cities that they give, they have an annual sponsorship. I think, for example, the main city, Lübbenau, where most people live, they give 10,000 euro per year. So I think it's because the landscape really means something to the local people.